As its name implies, the Branford Center Cemetery is located in the heart of the town of Branford, just steps from the town green. It was founded in 1645 and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Originally, it was a small graveyard attached to the log cabin meeting house of the Congregational Church. The church moved to what is now the town green, and the graveyard evolved into a large municipal cemetery. In 1867, the state of Connecticut granted a charter to the Center Cemetery of Branford as a non-religious public place of burial to be administered by a board of directors representing the owners of the grave sites. Please join us now as town historian Jane Bouley guides us through this historic place.
As you drive down the driveway entering Branford Center Cemetery, on the right-hand side is Section A, which is the oldest section of the cemetery, and this section is filled with wonderful old stones. Now, from time to time, we get an inquiry from someone. Their ancestor was a first settler, Branford, and died in 1689, and where is their gravestone? Well, in that period, in that colonial period, there were either no gravestones at all or crosses made out of wood. So there are very few stones that still survive from the 17th century here at Center Cemetery. So our response always is, they probably are buried here in this section. We just do not know where. There were no written records except for the stones themselves until the 1880s here at Center Cemetery. The oldest stones in Branford Center Cemetery are on the Montague Street side as you drive down the drive. And you will see as you walk through the cemetery the wonderful antiquity and artistry of these stones. An example is this stone for Lieutenant John Russell, who died in 1750 at the age of 41. And he was a lieutenant in the train band, or the militia, which was the local military group at the town that trained every Sunday afternoon on the Branford Green. This stone is made of sandstone out of Portland, Connecticut. It's very porous, and we're very fortunate that some of these stones are still existing because they don't hold up over time. And the artistry, you can see the wonderful carving on each side of the stone. This was all carved by hand. Now, the winged figure at the top is called a winged angel, and you will see that the angel looks quite happy. And that was the custom of the 1700s, that heaven was a wonderful place to go, and there was happiness in going to heaven. And so this is not a sad event. This is another sandstone gravestone for John Wilford of Branford. The Wilford family you'll be familiar with. There's a Wilford Avenue and a Wilford Road in Branford. But this is an example of the problem with some of the gravestone materials. Sandstone is quite porous, and if it gets the slightest little crack over time, the rain and the elements get behind it and disintegrates the stone, usually in the front. This is a good example of that, and over time this stone over the decades will no longer be legible. This sandstone marker is for the Foote family, who lived right here on Montague Street down by the railroad bridge. And this is a double-winged angel for two daughters of Ephraim Foote. One was named Lucy and one was named Clarissa. And you can see it's still in marvelous condition. One died at the age of 7 and one died at the age of 10. This sandstone is a little unusual. There are a few of these in the cemetery that are double stones for two people, and hence two winged angels. This stone is for Elizur Stent, who died in 1772 in his 57th year. And he was the grandson of Elizur Stent. There were several generations of Elizur Stents. The first one was the first town clerk of Branford in 1644. To the right of Elizur Stone is Ephraim Foote's footstone. In the very southwest corner of the cemetery is this gravestone for the Lanfair family, now pronounced Lanfear. And the first one is in memory of Lieutenant Aaron Lanfair. He was originally a sea captain for the Trowbridge family in New Haven, a master of a vessel that applied the goods from New Haven to the Caribbean, to the West Indies, Barbados, Bermuda, and so on. And he was in the Civil War, volunteered, and he is the only Branford native to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for capturing the flag of a Florida regiment in the Battle of Sailors Creek, Virginia in 1865. After the war, he returned to the Trowbridge fleet and was a master of vessels, and he was lost at sea and never heard from again in 1875. His descendants placed the stone in his memory in 1985. Near his stone you will see two versions of flag markers. One is a World War I marker which says Veteran of the World War, and the small one is a Grand Army of the Republic marker, post number 7, which is the veterans group of the Branford Civil War veterans. And every Memorial Day and Veterans Day since the Civil War, the veterans of this town have placed flags on the veterans' graves. Laying down and broken for a very long time is the gravestone of Aaron Landfair's grandfather, Oliver Landfair. This was the family that settled what's now called today Landfair's Cove near Double Beach. And there were only two families that lived there for over 100 years, the Landfair family and the Lindsley family. Oliver Landfair was also a sea captain, and he was, during both the Revolution and the War of 1812, in charge of sea coast guarding the town of Branford, and captured several British ships. And he was so good at doing this that the British had a price on his head. This is oral tradition. And he died during the War of 1812 of natural causes, and the family buried him in the middle of the night for fear the British would find him and disinter his body. In this grouping, by the wonderful stone wall on the side of the cemetery, is a nice grouping of slate stones, rather small in size. In the very front is a nice, wonderful stone for Reverend Philemon Robbins, and he was a longtime minister of the Congregational Church and built with his own funds the academy on the green. That stone is in Latin, and this is a stone that has a winged skull on the top. Next to him is the stone for his wife, Hannah Robbins. Halfway down the cemetery in Section A is this tablet that was placed in 1965. This was an early colonial millstone. The colonists had to bring their flour and wheat to be ground into cornmeal and flour, and this was brought here. It was on the property of the Hitchcock and Boyd family in Mill Plain, and brought by the church to commemorate the location. And according to tradition, and as best as we know, this surrounding area around the tablet, which is purposely left vacant without gravestones, marks that location. It was a log square building. Once they outgrew that building, they moved to the Branford Green. In Section A, or the old section of the cemetery, as you walk through, you'll notice that there's a number of tablets. These are flat surfaced with engravings on the top, and the body is right underneath the tablet. These are usually for ministers. They were very expensive in their day compared to other stones. For example, the stone tablet for Reverend Samuel Russell and his wife of the Congregational Church was in the front next to the stone that we talked about, his grandson, Lieutenant John Russell. This particular tablet is for William Rosewell, Rosewell, and he was a wealthy merchant during the colonial period and died in 1694. He had only one child, Elizabeth, who married Gordon Saltonstall from New London. He was a minister and a governor of Connecticut. Next to the stone of William Rosewell, which is the oldest stone in Center Cemetery, is the gravestone for his grandson, Rosewell Saltonstall, named for his grandfather. Rosewell Saltonstall was a Yale graduate. He graduated in 1751, and he was a recluse. He lived at the Saltonstall Mansion on the lake on the western side of Branford, named for the Saltonstall family, and died in 1788 at the age of 56. He is the last Saltonstall to live in Branford. Lower down toward the river in the old section of Center Cemetery is the next style of stone, which are made of marble. This marble came from Vermont. There was varying qualities of the marble, so some of the stones look better than others because of the quality of that marble. And these were used during the late 1700s throughout most of the 1800s. They're slightly different shape, but generally very simple in design with very little ornamentation compared to the sandstone that was used 100 years before this. As you look at these marble stones, you'll notice a lot of the Branford families that are familiar to you: Barkers, Tylers, Beeches. This stone is for Anna Beach, wife of Captain Samuel Beach, who died at the age of 41. And you'll notice this is a very good example of these marble stones. Very plain, it's square, it has no ornamentation at all, except for the urn and willow. And this was the next style of symbolism on the gravestone, meaning mourning and sadness. We've now transitioned from heaven being a happy place to sadness for the family. And you no doubt have seen pictures that are called mourning pictures or needle points, where a family is crying over the gravestone of a loved one with the urn and the willow in that picture. Behind the gravestone of Anna Beach and her husband, Captain Samuel Beach, is the gravestone of their son, also named Samuel Beach. And he died at the age of 27 in 1826, and he drowned. We do not know the cause of his death besides the word drowning in the church records, but there's a number of Branford men who drowned at sea. It was a risk going to the Caribbean in a two-masted sloop, and there were hurricanes, and the equipment was not such that they always knew a storm was coming. He left behind one-year-old twins. Among the marble stones in the old section of the cemetery are many for the Averill family. This is in memory of Daniel Averill, who died in 1842 at the age of 79, and as a young man he enlisted in the Revolutionary War and was a fifer. He became friends with Marquis de Lafayette, and when Lafayette visited Branford in 1834 on one of his 4 visits to the United States, he came and stayed with the Averill family and dined with them. You'll notice in the cemetery there are family lots, large fenced-in areas where families, many members of one family are buried. This section is the Gould family, and Dr. William Gould came to Branford in the late 1600s. They were very prominent in the state of Connecticut. His grandson, James Gould, was a lawyer and one of the first Connecticut State Supreme Judges, and he was also a teacher in the Tapping Reeve School in Litchfield County, which was the first law school in the state of Connecticut. As you go down the driveway of Center Cemetery, on the left is Section B, and this is the next oldest section of the cemetery. And if you look closely, you'll notice this is a transition of materials used for gravestones. There's very little sandstone, still quite a few marble stones, but now in the late 1900s into the 20th century and 21st century, we have the use of granite, which we're still using today. You'll also notice that there are some very large stones in Center Cemetery. These were always very expensive all through time, and so these were families that could afford to have a monument to themselves rather than just a gravestone. So some examples is this very large stone monument in granite to the Plant family. The Plant family owned much of Branford Hills and had a large orchard, and they were the largest producer of strawberries in the eastern seaboard until the 1930s. Another very attractive granite stone is the one for the Sheldon family, and on that stone it's dedicated to Edward Sheldon and his brother-in-law Charles Young, both of whom were Civil War veterans from Branford. And in the back of Section B is a sandstone monument. This is to Reverend Timothy Gillette, a minister for 50 years of Congregational Church, and his wife. In Section B and in the entire cemetery, 86 Civil War veterans are buried here. Many of them are in Section B. This is an example of one, Harvey Shepard, who was in the Civil War in Company B of the 27th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry. And Company B was a 9-month corps. In 1862, they fought at the Battle of Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg, and they were captured. Company B was Branford's hometown corps, so many men buried here in Center Cemetery were in Company B of the 27th. Harvey died in 1911. He was mayor of New Haven, but had a summer home in Short Beach, and so is buried in Center Cemetery. This is a nice example of the transition from sandstone and marble, now in the 20th century, to granite. And on the top of this stone is a depiction of his Grand Army of the Republic Veterans Medal. Another Shepard brother was Samuel Stent Shepard, who's buried near his brothers, a small granite stone. And he died in 1869 from illness contracted during the war. Altogether, 4 of the Shepard brothers served in the war, 2 survived and 2 died. The gravestone of their mother is in New Haven, and her gravestone reads, "I gave my 4 sons to the Union." Another Civil War veteran buried in Section B is John W. Lindsley of Branford, and this is a good example of a more typical granite monument that we know of today and still used today. And this granite comes from Vermont, not from Stony Creek, and it is machine carved. And as you walk around the cemetery, you'll notice there's a lot more leeway in the types of designs that are in the stones because they are machine carved. Alongside John Lindsley's gravestone is the post-GAR Grand Army of the Republic flag holder. Again, every Veterans and Memorial Day a flag is placed at his gravesite to honor his service. This is an example of a cast metal stone. These are one of my favorite monuments in Center Cemetery. There's about 10 scattered throughout the cemetery, and I invite you to come look at these closely because the detail is so wonderful on them. This particular one is for the Parsons family. They lived in the center of Branford, and they were connected to the factory, the Branford Lock Works, which closed in 1905. In Section B, there are family plots. For example, this is a large section for the Palmer family. They lived in the center of town next to Blackstone Library. Buried here is Walter Fowler, a son-in-law who was in the Civil War, and Isaac Palmer, who died at a young age. You can see these are marvelous granite stones, machine-made, typical of the late 20th into the 21st century. You will also notice in the cemetery there's a variety of religious symbols and crosses of different shapes and sizes. Branford Cemetery is a secular cemetery. It's non-denominational. All faiths and all people are welcome here. There's people from the Jewish faith, as there are Protestant and Catholic people. You'll notice the crosses on some of these gravestones. The Palmer family were members of the Trinity Episcopal Church. The newest section of the cemetery is down alongside the Branford River and really is very beautiful along the river, and it gives you reflection of where the colonists settled. And in this section, all the stones are made of granite because it's the newest section, and an example is this stone made of granite, and another example that all faiths and all persons are invited to come here and to be buried here. This is a stone from the Jewish faith, and on the top you'll see stones or pebbles, and in remembrance of the person when this cemetery is visited. The oldest person buried in Center Cemetery is James Douglas Sr., who died in 1864 at the age of 109 years, 9 months, and 11 days. Even at the age of 105, he walked from his home every week from Stony Creek to the center of Branford to get his groceries. The last stop today is this marble stone for Asa Freeman, the faithful Indian. Asa was a Native American person who traveled north in the winter and came to Branford and New Haven in the summer to work on the various farms. Toward the end of his life, he worked for the Lindsley family of Branford and died in 1885. He was buried by the town of Branford with this nice stone with the hand reaching to the sky, and it just says Asa the Faithful Indian. The children of Branford, when they tour Center Cemetery, this is one of their favorite locations. So we welcome you, do come here, and thank you.